This episode is proudly sponsored by Main Street Magazine.
Thorin, so today we have a friend of yours on our second episode of this season. And why don't you give us a little sense of who we're talking to today?
We have Mr. C.B. Wismar, who I affectionately always refer to as Sir. So he is quite the Renaissance man. His career has spanned all over, doing a little bit of everything in communications and beyond. I had the pleasure of meeting him and his lovely wife, Kathy, many, many years ago because he's been writing for me for, I don't know, a dozen, 10 years by now. But this is going to be a little bit of a different episode because CB is going to talk about the Moxie of caregiving. When Kathy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, their lives were completely changed, and CB has been very open about the challenges of it and how much courage it took for him and Kathy during this part of their lives. And he has graciously asked us to talk about it, and he would like to share kind of his experiences with it to hopefully help other people with it while they're dealing with their experiences. So without further ado, here's Mr. C.B. Wismar. CB, sir, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure is all mine, Thorin. Thank you. And thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. It's good to see you.
So we always jump on with the first question being, how would you define Moxie?
Yeah, it's interesting. Aside from the fact that it's a rather arcane beverage that somehow is identified with Maine and New England, in the particular case that I think we're talking about, especially in terms of caregiving, I think the definition is courage, if that's one word we want to use. I think Moxie is courage. And I take that from a quote that's been attributed to John Wayne, which is, courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway, which is exactly what happens when one suddenly becomes thrust into the point of becoming a caregiver.
Yeah. Now, before we go into that, can you share with us a little bit about your and Kathy's life? And because you're kind of a Renaissance man. You've been all over and done everything in a way.
Well, yeah, thank you. We had an intriguing relationship. We were married, just for the record, for 57 years and one day.
Wow. Wow.
And during the course of that, we hopscotched around the country. We had two opportunities that allowed us to live in two different cities, which meant that the only one that was making any money was Delta Airlines. But I started off in the media business. I was on radio first for 4 years, and then when we were married, during that period, we moved to LA. I was in film and television.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy was at that point becoming engaged in art. She took pottery lessons out there, and then when we moved back east, she started establishing studios, and I continued my peripatetic ways as a writer and producer. So I spent a lot of time chasing around, and she spent a lot of time being the stability and the rock. She did a great job of raising two kids. I tried to help when I was around. They both seem to be doing okay. Neither one of them is in jail, at least as far as I know. So my last full-time gig, I was head of the events team at AARP for 8 years. Kathy at that point was in Minneapolis, where we had been for a couple of years. She stayed there because she had a studio. And when I finally decided to hang it up, we decided to move to Connecticut, to a family place that had been around for what is now 100 years. And we had the idyllic life, as you mentioned, Thorin, at least idyllic for two crusty old retirees. She had her studio in Kent. I was busy fumfering around our place up on Music Mountain, doing some writing, some occasional producing on a freelance basis. And then after about 7 or 8 years of that being the life we had, suddenly everything changed in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And when she not only began to develop the symptoms of Alzheimer's, but we had that confirmed, life changed drastically. So
Yeah.
that's it in a nutshell, or a large nutshell.
Well, yeah. Now, can you talk to us a little bit about, I mean, it's different for everyone, I assume, but there are some overlying symptoms. How did that come about that you realized something was not quite there?
Yeah, and I'm sure it is different. And when you talk about caregiving, there are great differences between becoming a caregiver for a person who has it becomes mentally challenged. And let's
Hmm.
just presume that with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, that's mental challenges. If it's a physical challenge, if the person has a heart condition or cancer or any number of physically debilitating situations, caregiving takes on a different aspect. Probably the first indication for me was when it became obvious that Kathy was having difficulty recalling what she had made or she had done in her studio the days before. And she began repeating herself and starting to exhibit some real unease about what she was doing. She became insecure. There were a couple, I was talking to some friends over the weekend, and I consider myself a subsistence cook. I'm able to, obviously, you can see that I'm able to keep body and soul together. But Kathy was the cook for years, and she was very, very good. She loved to entertain. She loved to try new things. She would go out of her way to create interesting dinners and so forth. And literally one day, she turned to me and she said, "I don't want to cook anymore." And that was it. She never cooked from that time forward. And I realized that the reason was she had lost the connection with being able to recall recipes.
Oh,
That instead of having to try to ferret through the boxes of recipes and books and all the stuff that had accumulated over the years, she couldn't just recall what she needed to do to create a dinner, to create a dish, to bake, to whatever it was. So we began to see these moments of disconnect. Anxiety became part of it. We had two cars. At a certain point, her driving became a challenge. For those who know the area, Music Mountain to Kent, it's about a 25-minute drive. All of a sudden, she became unsure of herself, and it literally was get on Route 7 and go south. You can't miss it kind of thing. But that became a challenge for her. So it began to snowball, is the expression, until the point where I realized a couple things. Number one, we lived on 40 acres, gorgeous place, et cetera, but remote. And the winter months were going to pose a challenge because we were going to be alone, and the notion of needing help or support, which is an incredibly critical part of caregiving, that was daunting in itself. And to be quite honest, as I say, there are no things off limits. I was aware of the fact that eventually I could presume that Kathy was going to need residential care. That if,
hmm.
in fact, the Alzheimer's progressed in its uneven way, the way it often does, I was not going to be able to take care of her any longer. And that's very expensive. I mean, flat out, right up front. Health insurance doesn't cover it, Medicare doesn't cover it. Medicaid covers it, but you have to be in a position that Medicaid kicks in based on your income. So it became logical to sell that place, to move closer to where our daughter lives, which is right around the corner from where I am right now, and begin relying on her to backstop my care of Kathy, to be there to give me the occasional moment of respite so that I didn't have to be there constantly. And that was the progression. Kathy ended up spending 14 months in residential care, which was wonderful. I cannot say enough about the folks who dedicate their lives to being in that situation to care. I always would joke about the fact that they call it memory care They're not caring for the memory. There is no memory,
Yeah.
but you get the point. They are there to backstop, to be there in a caregiver, caretaker mode, and for Kathy's benefit, and frankly, for the family benefit. The moment that she became incapacitated to the moment that she died was literally 5 days. So it was not the moment of suffering. It was not the moment of prolonged agony on that front. So that was the trajectory.
Could we go back to when the diagnosis came in? What was that like? Like, I think about that for myself, getting, in 3 o'clock in the morning, what if I got a diagnosis of X?
Hmm.
What did that feel like? What were the conversations that it precipitated, if you're okay sharing?
Oh, sure. Obviously, two sides to that. When the diagnosis was given, the immediate shock to Kathy was profound. Uh, Even at the moment when she was beginning to struggle with recalling things, or she was beginning to have anxiety of her own just based on her condition, to suddenly be in a position of knowing that what is impacting your life has no positive outcome.
Right.
There is no cure. There are no vaccines. There is no shot or pill that will change this for you. Became devastating. And she absolutely spiraled into a period of extended depression. That depression changed as she got further and further into the experience of having, in her case, Alzheimer's. But that was the most dramatic thing. There were literally hours of trying to have me console her or assure her in the way that I'm sure all would do this for their partner, that things are going to be okay, we'll get through this, I'll take care of you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
For me, on the other side, it was the reality of having to deal with this, certainly having no roadmap. One of the absolute bedrock truths of being in a situation of being a caregiver is none of us is prepared. You don't say, okay, at a certain point in my life, I'm going to give up being able to go where I want to go and do what I want to do because I'm going to become a caregiver, and that's fine. No, it happens. And the changes that come not only to an individual lifestyle, but the way in which you conduct your family life, the way in you interact with friends. Looking back, I can talk to folks that knew Kathy in before, during, and certainly after the diagnosis, and they'll recall, oh yeah, I can remember when, or yeah, she seemed this or this happened. But the dynamics change, and all of a sudden, the way in which you order your life, the way in which you plan out a day, a week, an hour at some points, becomes totally different. So the burden may not seem as overwhelming as it may become, but the burden is there from the beginning.
Was there any feelings of resentment, might be too strong a word, but
No, it's
just,
not. Resentment is the right word.
oh, that your whole life, that the life that you had imagined for yourself as
Right,
well as both of you,
right.
just collapsed?
Absolutely. Oh no, absolutely. Uh, the word resentment is absolutely appropriate in this case because, as I say, things change drastically from the beginning. Even if you're in an early stages of a caregiving relationship, you realize that in most cases it is never ever going to get easier,
Right.
and it's as the line descends on one side of the graph, the line goes up on the other side in terms of the requirements of time and energy and focus. And you realize suddenly what you're going to have to give up. And I hope it doesn't sound callous, but it's absolutely true. Suddenly your life has changed. And it wasn't changed in a way that we had either anticipated or plan. If there was a plan, we were fine. We had a place, we had a community of friends, I knew where the grocery store was, I knew where the movie theaters were. Kathy knew where the studio was and where we would go to get art supplies and all the rest of it. Life was fine. And then it wasn't fine. And that moment, did it trigger resentment? Yeah, you bet. You bet.
How was it for you? I mean, as you admittedly said, Kathy was always the one who she was home base and she kind of was the caregiver for the kids and the home and everything. So how was it for you then to completely switch roles? Because now it was you who had to take care of her.
Right. Yeah, well, having lived in separate cities for a couple of years, I had, I said I'm a subsistence cook, but yeah, I've obviously had to take care of a place and do the laundry and, do the vacuuming and that kind of thing. And then I did the manly things that, everybody presumes that men are going to do in a relationship. But the moment that you realize, okay, you've got the whole package now. And if the sheets are going to get washed, you got to wash them. And you may not have been used to doing that since you've been retired and been together, et cetera, et cetera. You've got to do the grocery shopping. You've got to figure out where everything is. You've got to make the meals. Got to make sure the car gets serviced when it needs to be serviced. You got to make sure the guys come and mow the lawn. And that's in addition to making sure that the person that you've been with for all these years is comfortable, is somehow dealing with her anxiety, is occupied. The burden becomes complete at that point. And as I say, Moxie is courage. You got to get up in the morning and say, you know what? I don't want to do this today. Go do it anyway.
Right. Get in the saddle, as you said, right?
That's right.
What glimmers of grace or happiness or joy were you able to glean out of this period together? Were there any moments of anything that were redeeming?
Well, redeeming is an interesting word because to me that would imply a reversal of fortunes. That if they were redeemed, that meant they come back. I think the fact that we had some dear friends who were able to be aware of the situation and maintain a role of being supportive, still have us over for dinner, still come over and put up with my cooking, still suggest that we go out to a movie which, by the way, back to an earlier question about when did you know or how did you find out? We've been great movie fans our entire career. I started off in the film business, and I noticed that we would go to a film that had just come out, and Kathy would become impatient about halfway through the film, and she would continue to assert that she had seen the film before. And at first, this would lead to some moments of very awkward conflict because if we were with another couple, we would leave the theater and we're seeing a film that's in its second week being screened, and she would let them know that she had seen the film earlier and that it hadn't gotten any better, or she knew how it was going to end, and not knowing the situation at first, they would challenge her. Oh, really? How could you have seen this? It just came out. I mean, we live in remote Connecticut. You're not in LA or New York. And then she would launch into this fabrication about, well, they had a special screening and I was invited and CB was out of town. And so I came over and I was able to see the film, and she would have this rather complex fantasy that she would weave that was a way of protecting herself.
Mm.
And it was back to the, glimmers of hope. When the folks that we were with came to realize that that was going on, they automatically, without consultation, played along and just let it happen. Better not to create a problem, better not to challenge and then create more anxiety and more anger. So that was one thing. And the second thing was having the resources and support of family. There are lots of statistics which are in most cases quite boring, but the number of individuals who are in a caregiving posture within their own family that really rely on other members of the family or very, very close friends
Yeah.
is astounding. If you don't have support, if you don't have help, it is incredibly detrimental to the caregiver, not only physically and emotionally, but psychologically. It's tough, tough time.
Mainstream Magazine is a monthly print magazine and has daily content on its website as well, with stories that run the gamut of profiles, business articles, history and health, as well as entertainment and art, all of which is of interest to our readers. All of the content is positive and highlights the region that Mainstream Magazine covers. To learn more, please visit our website at www.mainstreetmag.com or find us on social media at Main Street Mag. I feel like I don't know if it's just becoming more and more talked about, whether it be our media today or social media, whatever, what have you. But I feel like it's becoming more and more talked about, this caregiver position. I don't know if it's aging generations as well, because you have, people who are now just raised their kids who are now taking care of their parents sometimes, or, in your position, you're taking care of a spouse,
Right.
or, like, obviously my grandparents, I have three still alive. They're in Iceland. My mother is flying back, every few months to take care of her parents. And it's interesting that you talk about, having other resources, other friends and family to help, like they have a network of friends that my mom is able to call when she's here, when she can't get there.
Mhm.
But and I think also caregiving, I mean, early on, I had a partner who had cancer and I was a caregiver. And to be in that position, it's mentally, physically, psychologically, it's exhausting. And it's like no one luckily things turned out quite well. But that 6 month experience, the stress of it, no one could have prepared me for that. And it's like you and Kathy, you get this diagnosis and the patient goes through like all these realms of things, and you as a caregiver, it's like almost like you can't process half of your feelings because you're taking care of the person who this is happening to. So I think, sometimes the caregivers do get not forgotten, but it's so important, because they're going through all of this and more as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. This is a yes and moment.
Yeah.
No, seriously. That that's the signature of the folks at Second City in Chicago is that you do yes and not yes but or whatever. You mentioned awareness, and I presented the potential for not being a big fan of statistics. So now I'm going to give you some statistics. So
Please
you
do.
have been warned. At the moment, the estimation is that there are 59 million people in this country that are caregivers.
Wow.
And that number is up 45% in the last 10 years.
Wow.
So part of it is awareness and media awareness and research awareness. And part of it is the aging population, as you
Hmm.
mentioned, because that's going to give us more of a platform to need that kind of care. But the impact on those 59 million people is now being measured on an annual basis. And not that I expect anybody to run out and grab a copy, but every year now there is a research study on caregiving in the USA that is produced by my friends and former employers at AARP that really focuses on what the impact is. And in the case of AARP, and this is not a plug, but access to the kind of support tools that make those 6 months when you were dealing with someone with cancer, or those 5 years when I was dealing with someone with Alzheimer's, at least potentially easier because there are resources available. So, very, very important.
And I think some people don't realize that there are resources available. So it's, I think, even more important to raise that awareness. So thank you for bringing that up for those
Yeah.
interested in looking it up. And we'll have some of that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, if you're 50 or over and you want to join AARP, and I realize everybody says, "Oh, I got the letter from AARP," but the immediate impact of that membership is access to an incredible network of support tools,
Hmm.
resources, and the capacity to engage with other people, which is some of the things that we've kind of referred to, but to engage with other people who are in the same situation, which becomes incredibly important. Having a support group, whether it's folks across the street or folks online that can be there and be empathetic with what's going on, is incredibly important.
Did you have part of that as well?
I was able to access the folks around me. The interesting thing was that the team of kids that I had that worked with me at AARP, a great group that worked on the events that we did across the country, when they found out that they were all great fans of Kathy's, when they found out that Kathy was in this situation, emerged in terms of communication much more frequently and proactively than they had before. It wasn't that I felt ignored. There was no reason that they needed to talk to me except to try to figure out where I had buried all the bodies. But when they found out what was happening with Kathy and therefore what I was dealing with, they became online supporters, which was fantastic. I still hear from them every once in a while. The old check-in. Are you still alive?
I think that it's not overstating it to say more caregivers in this, at least in this country, are women. Did you?
67%. Just to give you another statistic.
Thank you. I was hoping you were going to have the number to back that up because I throw things out all the time and not always is there someone with the number.
I spent a career of telling potential clients that if I didn't know the answer, I would lie convincingly. So,
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
but in this case, it's 67%.
So, do you have any observations about that, about differences in approaches to caregiving or difficulty finding other men who were in your position, anything like that?
Yeah, number one, women are a whole lot better at it than men are. And that,
Okay, we don't want to do that learned incompetence thing.
no, it, it's not learned incompetence, it's inherent incompetence. We didn't have to learn how to be incompetent. We were born that way.
Oh, there's some phrase for that where I don't know how to make the bed, and so therefore you don't make the bed. That kind of
Yeah,
thing.
Uh-huh.
well,
Uh-huh. Sounds
yeah.
familiar.
On, yeah, exactly. Don't go there, right? No, I'm serious. There's an image that sticks in my mind when the whole ugliness in Ukraine started a couple of years ago. There was a news crew on the ground, and one of the villages in the eastern part of the country had just come under attack, and people were trying to figure out where they were going to go and how to live and so forth. They interviewed a woman who was standing next to her mother, and her point was, my mother has been living with us for the last several years. I don't know where we're both going to go because I need to be able to take care of her. This was something that was so articulate for me because I think there is a natural tendency on the part of those who have been caretakers from the birth of their children. I mean, let's be realistic about this. As soon as a woman becomes a mother and has to deal with the kids, and the old man is out the door. But the notion of being a caregiver for an infant is not dissimilar to being a caregiver for an adult who has more and more infantile reaction. I met one individual when Kathy was in institutional care, another husband who showed up every day at 1 o'clock, and I would come in generally about 1:30. It was about a 20-minute drive. I'd drive over and I'd get myself checked in and check in with the nurses, and then I'd walk into the common area in this part of the facility, and he would be sitting there with his wife every day. The only day he took off was Sunday because he wanted to play golf. And if we would sit there and I would try to engage Kathy in conversation, or I'd try to figure out, where to sit, or if it was warm, could we go outside, kind of thing. I noticed that he and his wife never spoke. He never ever that I could see had anything to say to her. And I thought, okay, the guy gets points for showing up. All right, I'll give him that. But he is not capable. He doesn't have he doesn't have the clubs in his bag, to take the golf analogy forward, to be able to engage and to move this relationship along. So he gets appearance points, but that's it. And I would sit there with Kathy and try to have a conversation, and the conversations as folks with dementia continue down that road become more and more bizarre. It was about 3 months after that she moved into that residential facility that I became a friend, not her husband. And there were times when I was her father. And as she got further down the road, there were times when she would look at me and say, "And who are you again?" And I mentioned the fact that she loved to entertain. The one thing that she maintained literally until her last days was she would often say, "And you know what, this weekend, let's get together. Why don't you and your wife come over for dinner? My husband is out of town right now, but he'll be back and we can get together and have dinner." And that's something that was back somewhere in her mind that kept coming up and coming up. But back to the difference between men and women. I just think it's an inherent trait that comes from years of women being caregivers without identifying it as that,
Mm-hmm.
and men not having to do that, and suddenly being in a situation where we don't know what the rules are. We have no idea. We're making this up as we go along, and as a result, sometimes we're not real good at it.
Her relationship with, I'm going back,
Sure.
circling back again. What was it like with her artwork? Was that
Mm.
especially tragic for her, to forget how to be an artist? Or was that the one piece that was just so instinctive and muscle memory that she could still do? How did that work out?
Once again, it went down the line. When she first began displaying the behaviors and the actions. She became frustrated. We have had some dear friends who had asked Kathy to do a set of dishes for them. She was a potter and a painter. And that should have been a relatively easy project, a task for her. They wanted a dinner plate, a salad plate, and a soup bowl or something. And, they said, "We'd like them basically in these dimensions, and can you do it?" "Oh, yes, of course I can." And she couldn't. She would do one plate, and then the next day she would forget about how she made that plate, or she would do a series of pieces, and then the instruction had been very clear in terms of what glazing they wanted, and she would just decide to glaze them the way she wanted to. So what looked like aberrant behavior was really her not being able to register into the cycle of what she was doing. In terms of painting, there was once again a very abrupt stop to it. She used to go back and forth, and her studio in Kent was set up. It was a lovely facility. The back room was all clay. She had a couple wheels, she had a kiln, she had all her glazes and all her things back there. In the front room, she was set up to paint. And so she would work in clay for a week and get a bunch of things put together, and then she'd move up front and she'd paint for a while, and that way she would once again be able to be interactive with her own capacity as an artist. At a certain point, she stopped painting completely. She just couldn't figure out what to do. And as she tried to stay with pottery, it became more and more of a challenge. So
Mm-hmm.
eventually, she just gave up. The one thing she would do when she was in residential care was let me know that she really had to go upstairs because she had work in the kiln and she had to unload the kiln. Because once again, in the back of her mind, that was still going on. That was
Right.
still an active memory for her.
That must have been very difficult. I can't imagine, something that's so part of your life that, not that you could do with your eyes closed, but it's so part of you.
Yeah.
And then it's just the door shuts.
Yeah. No, it had to be, on one hand, it had to be terribly frustrating and
Mm-hmm.
anxiety provoking for her. On the other hand, she was bedeviled by the fact that in the back of her mind, in the recesses of her experience, she was still an artist, and she
Yes.
couldn't quite figure out how to get it forward again.
Yes. Looking back, are there things you would do differently, or not that you'd want to live it again, but is there
Right.
any different way you would come at it? Or there is no better way? There's just you're in it and you do what you do each day.
You mean like lessons learned or?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is such an existential experience that I'm not sure you can look back and say, "Oh, I would have turned left and not right there." And I'll recount this experience as kind of an illustration of that. For the last 2 to 3 months before we moved Kathy into a residential facility, I knew that that's where we were going. And the days became more and more strained, and the moments became more and more difficult. But I could never figure out how to make the transition, how to trigger the event that would, excuse me, move her from being in this house in this daily routine to move her to the place where she needed to be for caregiving reasons. There was a moment one evening where she was just having an enormous amount of difficulty, and I'll not go into the way in which these things get acted out, but they become physical at a certain point. They become very, very, very difficult to manage. And it was an evening, and out of the blue, I sent a text to our daughter, and I said, "I don't know if you're out or what you're doing, but if you could stop by, I could really use some help." And Becky came in and sat down and had her usual bright, positive attitude. And we began talking. And the conversation got Kathy calmed down to the point where every time there was a break in the conversation, Becky said, "Mom, don't you think it would be a good idea to get some help with this?" And then we'd talk about something else, and then there'd be a break, and Becky would say, "Mom, don't you think now would be a good time to see if we can get some help?" And we're talking, it's now 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. Kathy had always resisted because there is that inherent sense of, I can do this, I can get on top, I can do it on my own kind of thing. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she said, "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." And I promise you, we were out the door within 5 minutes. And it was like somebody flipped a switch. And we got her to an emergency room. We got her checked in. They evaluated her overnight. They got her into geri psych ward, which is geriatric psychiatry, where they need to evaluate a person. And then I was very fortunate in finding a spot for her to become a resident. Where I'm going with this is, would I do anything differently? If I could have figured out 2 months before that how to trigger that moment, I would have done it.
Yeah.
Because those 2 months were incredibly unpleasant for Kathy, and they were incredibly unpleasant for me. And it would have been helpful to both of us if we didn't have to go through that. We did. You move on. Moxie is courage. You do it. You get up in the morning and do it. But knowing not only the time when it becomes important to make a change, but also having access to the information and, one would hope, the support group, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's the family doctor, whoever it might be, that can help facilitate the transitional moments, is incredibly important. And I understand not everyone is in a position to be able to underwrite the cost of someone in permanent care.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yet, once again, I sold the place on Music Mountain and basically used that money to take care of Kathy. She had been there for me for 57 years. I was not going to say, "Okay, you're on your own, kid, have a nice life," because it wasn't a nice life. And so it was her money as much as it was mine, and therefore it was money well spent. But having the support when those transitions need to be made is incredible. And that's something that, if folks can, when they realize they're in that situation, they're getting in that situation, this is not going to go well. Okay, what's my support group? Who are the people that I can rely on?
That's almost sometimes I think a superhuman trait to be able to come out of what you're dealing with so intimately and take that view, that larger view, and say, this is the moment where there's so much perhaps denial and inertia and not wanting to make the hard decision, that oftentimes it's the external thing, like a fall or something that forces the decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really difficult place to ever find yourself, is that moment of clarity where you can say, this is the moment, without something else intervening to help illuminate it.
Yeah, part of it is being able to be honest enough with yourself as a caregiver to say,
Yes.
okay, I'm not going to continue to kid myself
Hmm.
that I can do this, or this will be okay, or maybe tomorrow it will be better, when for the last 2 weeks it hasn't been better at all. And be able to come to that moment of saying, okay, it's decision time, folks. We got to do something here, and we got to do it now, because otherwise this is just going to continue to spiral into worse and worse situations.
Takes a certain amount of courage to also be to kind of let go of the reins a little bit.
We
And
call that Moxie, Thorin.
yes. Yeah, no, when you're talking about this, I mean, you were talking about the female caregiver perspective. I'm a mother, I'm looking at my own parents who, my dad went through a whole thing and I was the one holding it all together and doing the English translations and all this and seeing my grandparents and all this. So I have a little bit of perspective with, all this, but therefore, when you come to that clarity and I can't do this anymore and this is not going any better it's not that you're giving up. You're doing the best for the person as well as the caregiver, correct? Is that how it felt in the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was about to make the silly comment that the difference between stupidity and courage is a very fine line. It's true. There's a certain amount of ignorance that we have to fight all the time. First of all, because we've never done this before.
Right, right.
There's no muscle memory for how to deal with this. And so therefore, every day becomes another point of decision and trying to figure out a way to cope with whatever is going on. The moxie, the courage, the strength, the insight, the commitment, whatever word you want to use, of being able to say, okay, I'm approaching a moment when a decision has to be made and I'm going to make it, is incredibly difficult, because as most of us know, and I'm certainly the poster child for this, it's a whole lot easier to put it off. If it's not right in front of me and I have to make a decision, yeah, I'll get to it tomorrow or the next day or next week, whatever. It doesn't have to be done right now. When you are involved in a caregiving situation and the issues are becoming more and more dramatically difficult, yes, you do. You've got to make a decision. And that's where you need all the support and all the help you can get.
So we are at that time, Thorin.
Oh my God, that went by so fast.
CB, this has been very, very honest. I mean, these are really hard things to live through, let alone talk about. And you've given us a lot of insight. Is there anything for anyone in any situation, but particularly caregiving, that could help them keep hold of that courage or develop it? Anything, a little nugget.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I would say to someone who is in a caregiving situation, whether it's the beginning or well along the way, is take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing that I think is missing in most folks' approach to what it means to be a caregiver.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that you get the respite. You've got to make sure that you take care of yourself physically and emotionally to be able to sustain that role. And that's difficult. That's why having friends or family or somebody around that can give you that break is so important. You need to get out for the walk. You need to be able to get some sleep. You need to be able to go do something else for a while just to get your mind off it, because you need to take care of yourself. The existence on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis, as I say, it's existential. You never know what's going to happen, and you've got to deal with it at the time. But you have to be able to deal with it, and I think that's critical.
Did you find yourself, I don't know what your spiritual practices are, did you find yourself turning to any kind of wisdom or higher power in any of this? Or did you really feel existential, like life is nothing?
I'm presuming that those who listen to this will not be offended if I say this. I have a graduate degree in theology. I was an ordained minister, a Lutheran clergyman at one point in my life, and I found myself, as I went through life, drifting further and further away from that. So the answer is no. I have become quite an existentialist, and I think that the immediacy of not only life, but the decisions of life is the thing that is going to determine how well we're able to manage these challenges. I won't dig myself a further hole in that. I think folks have to be willing to deal with the issues on a very human and very personal basis, because pushing them off and thinking there's going to be some bolt of lightning or some magic doesn't work that way, folks.
Yeah.
Who knew I was going to uncover that little tidbit at the very end?
Right.
That wasn't in the bio. Anyway.
And for very good reason, I might.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Well, CB, thank you so much for sharing your story. And Kathy, I never met her, but she sounds like she was an extraordinary person and partner to you. So I'm sorry for your loss.
I always referred to her as my better two-thirds, and that wasn't far off.
She lit up every room she came into.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Mary, this was a different type of episode for us.
You know, it was different, and yet the threads of Moxie really run true through everyone's experience. And CB's story and his honesty were very humbling.
Yes, they were.
I'm grateful that he chose to share it with us and our listeners. And his words resonated quite a bit, having watched my mother be the caretaker for my father with Parkinson's, and then my siblings and I helping caretake my mother after he died. And I just appreciate his honesty of the range of feelings and experiences that caregiving brings. So I thought it was a really powerful episode, and I'm glad we did it.
Yes. And one of the things that, I of course knew Kathy before she was diagnosed, and she literally, as I said, she would light up any room. She was such an amazing person, and I'm grateful for having gotten to know her. And CB would keep me, he would touch base during, the progression of her Alzheimer's. And so to hear him talk about it in this context, well over a year later, I think it's a reminder that there are more people out there who are caregivers in some way. And he did say, especially women, we become caregivers as soon as we have our kids, for those of us who have children. But it's more than that. We often caretake, and this applies to anyone, for your spouse, for a sibling, for a parent. And I think it's becoming more multi-generational. And I think sometimes we live in our own little bubble and forget there are resources and there are help groups and other people and friends who we can reach out to. And, as CB was saying, his former colleagues at AARP who, once they knew what was happening, would check in, would call, so I think it's important to realize and remember that you have a community of friends and family, or strangers even, who are more than happy to be there for you, or lend a hand, or even just check-in text. It means a lot.
I also think that it points to a societal lack, that we don't have the infrastructure in this country to deal with caregiving in a way that addresses the scale of how many people are doing it and what it does to lives, and the economics of it, the morality of it, that we as a society could do more. So anyway, well, thank you so much for suggesting him. It was, I know I've read his byline for over a decade, and it was great to be on this podcast with him.
Yes. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for CB for having taken the time and to just be so open and raw. And I hope that for any one of our listeners, that if there's something they can take away, that's his experience, then made it even more worth it.
Amen.
To share, because we're not alone out there. And
no, we're not. All right. Well, we'll see you at the next episode.
Until the next one. This episode is proudly sponsored by Main Street Magazine.